So welcome back to season 2 on the channel. And why is there a season 2? Well, I'd got to a point with what I was doing where I was unhappy with certain things, particularly the gauge of the track, and that just compromised literally every sort of sub-project as part of the process. And I thought, you know what, I've got to address this issue, and the sooner I do it the better. And of course, once I've made a decision to replace all the track on the model, then that's quite drastic, and it's kind of like going back to the beginning. So I thought, do you know what, I'll draw a line, we'll kind of start afresh, and I can try and build some structure each episode, and it will be a bit more flowing rather than darting between one thing and another and it being sort of disjointed and discontinuous. So today's first episode we're going to look at track, or more specifically the design of the track. And what I'd like to do is just a little overview of a piece of software, Templot. And Templot is a wonderful tool. It's not really for planning complex formations of track, although it would do that. Really, it's for designing individual components from which you produce templates for hand building the track, and that's something that I've been doing over the last sort of week or so. However, I've been playing with Templot now for a few weeks, and I'm still very much a beginner, so this is not a tutorial. It's just kind of a show what can be done, and it might be of interest to some of you and give some of you some ideas of how you might use it yourself. Now, it's not just for hand building track. I'm not here to convert everybody to do as I've done and sort of change gauge and go to P4. I think that's probably ridiculous for many people. But Templot, of course, will produce a track templates in any gauge you like. So if you were used to working in N gauge or 00, for instance, the idea of hand building the odd piece of track work to maybe fit in a particular place or solve a problem that you can't solve with track that's commercially available, I think for that Templot could be really useful for those who prefer to use ready-to-use track. So I'll begin with a quick sort of overview of the very, very basic controls, and then I thought it would be fun to model up a kind of a real world situation, and so we'll get into that a little bit later on in the video. But before we get started with things, I thought I'd just sort of talk briefly of where the direction of this particular series of the channel will go to. I hope that by the end of this series, and this might be sort of 10-12 episodes, something like that, to have reached a point where all the track has been relayed and we're back to a position and we've got where we were with the station all set up, with the tracks in and out of it all laid, and we'll have some running footage for you as well. Now, I'm aware that in changing gauge I've also got to sort of convert all the rolling stock to a P4 as well, and in order that we can have something to show you whilst all this construction work is going on, I thought it would be quite good fun to look back to the days of when the original line was built at about the turn of the 20th century. And the contractors had purchased a number of locomotives for the job, and we'll talk more about those in detail another time. But one of them was this one here, Bexhill. And as a kind of a bit of fun and have something to show, I've got myself a little model of Bexhill or something very, very similar. Those of you who really know what you're talking about will be able to spot the differences immediately. But this will be our little engine that we'll have to test the track, and I've got one or two other little projects in mind for this thing as we go on. So we'll see that again a little bit later on in this video, and lots of it across the course of this particular series. So then let's have a go and see what Templot's all about. I've got it loading here. This is the initial loading screen. We click go. It checks with the Templot website, check you've got the most up-to-date version. It says, do I want to restore previous work? In this case, no thanks. And it presents us with a curved turnout. Now, I still don't know really what the correct term is, whether it's turnout or points or whatever. Templot uses turnout, so turnout's what I shall use for the remainder of the video. So we've got a turnout on the screen, and as you can see, it's curved. Now, we can do all sorts of things with this. We can change it to a piece of plain track. We could change it back to a turnout, and again you can see the turnout appearing on that length of track. If we hit this button up here, roam, we can, with the left mouse click, move that turnout along that piece of track. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point one or two details. So This piece of track running into the turnout is the entry road, and this one coming out of it is the exit road. So if we didn't want that exit road, we can split exit, split approach, we can take that off. Anyway, what I thought we would do is just have a little look at this, and I'll show you some of the basic controls first of all. Now this isn't a tutorial, I've only been using this for a few weeks myself, but just one or two controls just to get us going, and hopefully those of you who have not tried using this before will feel comfortable to have a go yourself. So let's come up here to geometry first of all on the top of the screen, and let's make that a straight turnout. Now that's pretty good. So there's one or two things we need to bear in mind with the turnout, and two pieces of terminology. The first one is the switch, so that's this end of the turnout where the blades shift from the main road to the secondary route. So that's called the switch, and this part up here is the crossing, or the V crossing. And we can change the variables on those to adjust how that turnout appears. But really the very first thing we need to do when we use the piece of software is tell it what gauge we're going to use. Now by default this little panel here shows us the gauge, and it says it's T55 in this instance. That's kind of a generic gauge. So let's come up to gauge, and we can choose, well, there's a whole host of programmed in gauges. So for the purposes of this I'm going to choose, well, let's choose P4. Okay, so we've changed the gauge and it's come back to this screen. Let's make that straight once again, and we'll have a look at some of the settings on the turnout itself. So let's zoom in a little bit, get that centered on the screen. Now I mentioned that we've got a switch and we've got a V crossing, and we can change those settings. So if we come up here to template, we can go to switch settings, and it gives us a wide variety of different options. But let's just stick with these ones here, the REA switches. Now if I set it to A, you'll see the switch got slightly shorter. And let's change it to an F, and you'll see that switch now becomes much longer. And that's essentially what the switches do. They control the length, and obviously I think the higher the speed the line, the longer the switch you would have. So let's change that back. Let's go with something fairly average. Let's go with a B, back where we started from. Now the crossing angle can also be adjusted. So we go template, V crossing settings, and we can choose whatever setting we like. So let's go for 1 in 8. We've now created a B8 crossing or turnout. Now there are other controls we could do on here, but we'll save those for the minute. Let's not get too bogged down. If we want to move this about our page, we can click the shift and join, and then with the left mouse click we can move this around. We can hit stop. We can hit length, and that will adjust the length of this thing. You'll see that's useful a little bit later on. We can roam, again left click, we can move the turnout along that piece of track. Rotate, we'll rotate the whole template, so that's quite useful. What else is useful here? Well, I think that will do for the minute. Oh no, curve. Okay, so if we hit the curve tool, again with the left hand mouse, we can left click and we can drag and we can change the curve. Now what's really useful here is it tells us the radius of that curve. So we can set that precisely. So if I wanted it to be, let's say 4 feet, 1220 millimeters, it's adjusted that for me perfectly. So that's now sort of geometrically known, the radius. Okay, so when we've created a track template, we can print that out. That's no trouble at all. But what if we wanted to create something more complex? What if we wanted to add some other track work on here? Well, we can do that, but what we need to do here is hit these 2 orange down arrows first of all. And what that does is it will save that template we've just created and store it in the background. So now we're not working on a template, and that thing is kind of permanently saved for us. So let's create something else. Let's go to new, and it gives us some options, some quick controls here. I'm just going to hit OK, and it will give us another new piece of track. Now I'm going to hit shift and join, and we can move this around. We could do more or less what we like with it. In this case, I'm going to change it to a piece of plain track. What I'm going to do is, using that shift and join command, I'm just going to hover the red connector at the end of the piece of track over here, and it will automatically snap that on for us, which is really good for lining things up. And now all those same controls that I just showed you previously will now all work on here, so we can curve this piece of track if we wanted and do all sorts with it. We can adjust its length, and if we extend its length, it will extend or decrease with that same radius curve. Okay, so when we're happy with that, we hit the 2 orange arrows and it stores it into the background. And so we can continue. We could build up a very complicated track formation quite straightforwardly, but we have to remember we're only working on one element at a time. Okay, so let's come back to this piece, and I'm going to click on it. It highlights it and a pop-up menu appears. So I'm going to hit make the control. I could do a keyboard, press the letter M, have the same effect. So this piece of track is now the one I'm working on again. So we're only working on one piece at a time. I'm going to work on this piece. In fact, I'm going to leave it with a slight curve. Now let's imagine this was a double track main line. We want to make a crossover. If I hit the crossover button at the top of the screen and hit continue, it will drop in another turnout to create that crossover. And if we're happy with that, we can hit the orange arrows. And so we've now got 3 templates that are part of our track. We could do all sorts of things. We could, for example, click back onto here, go make control, and now we can make that a double track. So I can click the double track turn outside button at the top of the screen, and it's doubled it up. And if I use the length control, I can pull that back so that it's a nice fit. And so that, in a nutshell, is how Templot works. The controls, I've probably shown you most of the controls that you would use most of the time. But if we have a look here, I'm going to make this piece the control again. We can see the timbering doesn't quite work out here nicely. So we can add some timbering or sleepers, whatever we fancy doing. So I'm now working on editing my original template. If I come to, trying to think which one this is now, reel, shove timbers, you'll see it will number all of the timbers and all of the sleepers. So in this case, I'm going to choose this one here. If I click on it, I can now use this control box here. I could extend that timbering across, and I could whiz along and do all of these. So that then is how to use Templot and how to go about creating a template for an individual track work, sort of component. But look, let's come back here to make control, output, print the control template, and now I can choose my printer here. It's going to tell me my printer's not online because it isn't. And it will enable me to print this, the template, in order to construct that piece of track. So in a nutshell then, that is how to use Templot, and I hope for those of you who struggled that just a quick little overview of it is useful. So then that was a quick overview of what you could do with Templot. And really all credit to Martin Wynn, the gentleman who's developed the piece of software over decades. It really is fantastic, and the more I use it, the more engaging I find it, and the more useful it becomes. But what's really good fun is to overlay track over a map, and you can do all of that in Templot. So in this next sequence I'll show you me doing just that. I'll keep it quite quick and hopefully as short as I can in order just to sort of see what's involved. You know, it's not a tutorial, it's a demonstration, and if it's something you're interested in, now I really would recommend you get on the Templot website and investigate it a little bit more. Download the software and have a go yourself, because it's really quite good fun, and I could imagine becoming quite an absorbing hobby in itself for many people. Anyway, let's have a look. So then, for this little bit of video, what I've done, I've got Templot and I've imported a map of Sidley Station, which is the next station down the line between Bexhill West and Crowhurst. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can see we've got the station platforms here, the goods shed, I've spoken about that in a previous video, and some of the goods yard. Now you should also see I've got a piece of plain track here, so if I use the Shift and Join command, I can just click on there and drag that up however I wish. Now what I'm going to do, this isn't a tutorial as such, but hopefully I'm going to run through this as quick as I can and show you the sorts of things that can be achieved in Templot. So I've chosen the rotate command, and what I'm going to do is just rotate this piece of track, this piece of plain track, and I'm going to drop it on these lines. Now if I use the length tool, I can extend that up. If I zoom out a little bit, we can see it's just running offline. Now I know this is a straight piece of track, so if I just use the rotate command, I can drag that up, something like that. So that is now perfectly aligned with that track running through the platform. So I'm going to leave it at that for now, except what I'm going to do, I'm going to click stop, and now I'm going to change that piece of plain track to a turnout. And if you can see, it's dropped the turnout down the bottom of the screen if I zoom up a bit. So it's changed this piece of track from a plain piece of track to a turnout, and it just so happens that this exit road from the turnout is quite long. Now if we use the roam tool, I can drag the actual switch and the crossing up and down and orientate this however I wish. So I'm just going to leave it here for the minute, and over here is a button facing and trailing, and I can change it from its configuration so it faces the other way. Now it's moved that along my length of track, so I can bring it up, say to there, where there is crossover. And for now I shall hit stop. Okay, so this piece of track that is sort of highlighted in white, if I zoom in you can sort of see it a bit better. It's not white, it's a light blue, but you can see that overlaid over our map. Now what we can do is make that a crossover. Now let's just click continue, and it's now created a crossover track. There's some issues with the timbering here, but it doesn't matter, we can sort that out later. Okay, so our first piece of track has now sort of turned blue and green, and that's been saved to the background, and currently we're working on the highlighted turnout, which is here. Now I'm happy with that, so what I'm going to do is hit this little button here, and that will save that into our kind of storage box. Okay, I'm going to get a new piece of track, and here we go, and that's come out as a turnout, so I can change it to a piece of plain track. Now if I hit Shift and Join, I can drag this piece, and if I pop it on here, it naturally aligns it with that turnout. So we can change the length, and let's just bring that one down to there, and I'm going to put that one in the storage box. So we need another new piece of track. Again, it's come out as a turnout. I'm going to hit Shift and Join, and I can attach that one here. Now, if I use the length tool, I can drag that out, and I've now got a perfect double track, all perfectly spaced. There. So I'm going to hit that button and store that to the background. Okay, let's zoom around our page a little bit now and let's see what we've got going on here. So we've got a piece of straight double track that runs down here and then it runs into a curve. So I think what we'll do is we'll get a new piece of track and using that shift and join there we go, that's now attached to there. And again we can get the length tool and I can drag this length out to approximately there. Okay, now this has a turnout in that runs into the goods yard, so we can change that piece of track, make it a turnout, use the left hand right hand tool and change the orientation of it. So we can now save that piece of track to our storage box, grab a new piece, there it is, shift and join, and there it's lined it up perfectly. But again, it's a turnout, we want a piece of plain track, so we just hit this button to make it a piece of plain track, and with the length tool just drag that out. Now we can zoom in and we can set those lengths really very precisely, but for now let's just, oops, there we go, let's just go with that. I'm running through this really quickly just to sort of show you how simple it is once you've got the hang of it. Okay, so we'll save that to our storage box, and now I'm going to get another new piece of track. Again, it's come out as a turnout, so we'll hit plain track, shift and join, and I'm going to attach it there. And we can adjust the length of this as before. But of course, the main line, the real piece of track that we want to replicate, is curved. So what we can do is use the curve button here, and then holding down the left hand mouse button we can just gently curve that round however we want it to go. And so what I'll do is I'll just zoom in, scroll around and see how good a fit that is. It's not too bad, perhaps we could just curve it a little bit more. Now as you start to get into this you can do transition curves and all sorts of wonderful things, but that will do for now. Now if we have a look, there's another crossover here, and this is interesting because it is a curved crossover. So this isn't, we're not going to be able to do this if we were using a piece of standard track that we sort of bought off the shelf. So this is where Templot is amazing, in that it enables us to design it so that we can hand build it exactly how we like. So this piece of plain track, if I hit the turnout button and we make it into a turnout, we can now roam that turnout along that piece of track and sort of get the crossover in more or less the right place. Now we can adjust the switch settings and the crossing angle. I won't get into that in this particular video. It doesn't take long, it's quite straightforward once you've got the hang of it. But now we've done that, quite happy with that, I'm going to hit crossover and it's put our crossover in for us, which is brilliant. So we've got a couple of options of what to do next. Now what we can do is select this piece of track, let's make it the control, and what that does is saves the turnout we've just placed to the background, and it's highlighted that previous piece of track again, so that's now the piece of track we're working on. And what we can do is make it a double track turnout side, which is this button here. And that's now dropped a piece of track in that continues that double line, that main line, double track all the way along. Now it overlaps here, so there's a couple of ways around this. What I'm just going to do, just for sort of speed here, is just use the length tool, and I'm just going to drag that back so that we can see that original turnout. what we could do is split it and then have two pieces, one each side. But for now, that will do. For the purposes of this video, to try and keep this fairly quick. The rest of the process is now, we can sort of work through this at some leisure. This is the sort of the interesting bit where we can make all these curves flowing. And I'm not going to run through the whole goods yard. I'm just going to sort of give you an idea of perhaps what we might be able to do. So that piece of track we've just created, I'm going to hit that button to save that into the background, and you can see it's highlighted in that sort of green colour. So let's grab a new piece of track, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. I think I'll use a piece of plain track, and I'm going to use the shift and join command, and I'm going to do my best to attach that onto there. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is drag that out something like that. Yeah, that's okay. And what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to make this a transition curve, an S-curve, reverse transition. And can you see how it's sort of developed that S-curve shape, which is sort of roughly what we've got going on across this piece of track work here. So what I can do now is let's adjust the first radius. So we've got two radiuses on this transition curve. We've got a radius here and a radius here. So if I've now set this to adjust the first radius, so I hit the curve tool and I can drag that round till I'm sort of more or less happy with it, perhaps something like that. We can now adjust the second radius again with the curve tool, and this is now going to give me the option to tweak this end. So we might want to go perhaps I don't know, maybe something like, I'm going to say there, and come back and adjust that first radius again. Until we get something that's reasonably flowing. Now we can insert turnout onto this piece of track. So here's one, we can change its orientation, roam it along the track, perhaps something like that. Let's store that into the background, grab a new piece of track. I'm doing this very quickly. This is actually quite good fun to mess around with and do this over and over again until you get really happy with it. Let's rotate that about. Something like that perhaps. So there you have it. Let's store that into the background. That very quickly, in about 13, 14 minutes, something like that, is how we would go about tracing a track plan. It can be that quick and that simple. Now the fun part about all of this is, of course, we can get these curves absolutely flowing. And if I zoom right in, let's zoom in on that curved crossover, for example. All the geometry for these track components is calculated for us, and we can print these off. In fact, I'll show you a print off of this curved crossover in just a moment, and you can see just how detailed and accurate it all becomes. So there we go. I hope that was of some interest, showing you how I've used Templot with regard to the track plan at Bexhill West, and in this example of Sidley Station, I hope that's given those of you who perhaps haven't tried Templot before the encouragement to have a go. Some people find it very fiddly to use. I think once you get the basics down, it's quite straightforward and really quite intuitive. Now, I said during that segment that I would show you one of the printouts, and here it is. This is the turnout on that curved section of line leading out of Sidley Station. This was on the down line, and I haven't printed the whole thing. I'll just show you one of the templates for now. And at first view it just looks like a plain straightforward turnout, but if I place a straight edge along the stock rail, hopefully you'll be able to see the very subtle curve that's in that piece of track. And of course it's a scale radius, so it's very, very, very gentle radius indeed. Probably not the sort of thing you'd see on the average model. However, on Bexhill West, all of the radiuses, I believe, are my design are all exactly correct. I've followed the line as it's been laying on maps, but I've also used curvature information for the railway line from the gradient profile chart, and that's hopefully going to enable me to get all the point work for Bexhill West hopefully as accurate as I can. Now, this is a new area for me, and there's lots of terminology and stuff that I'm enjoying learning, but hopefully that's the kind of level of finesse that I hope to achieve. Anyway, that's it for today. Next time we're going to look at actually making some track. I've done quite a bit of plain track now, and I think I've sort of got the hang of that. But we'll have a look at a turnout as well, and then we'll look at discussing how that's going to integrate within the model as it currently stands. So, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Cheerio.